Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back, book lovers. Thanks for tuning into the channel again. Just let me fix something very quickly. Why is it asking me that? Come on, YouTube. Okay, so what story are we reviewing today? Sorry, just 1 second. I'm having a little technical. What is YouTube saying to me here? Okay, so yes, never mind, never mind. So today we are reviewing a short story called. Let me just check. Yes, I think we're good. Okay, today we're reviewing a short story called Human Decency. Okay, Human Decency, if you can see that, okay. Human Decency, but the Korean title is Ingan Edehan Yei, and the writer is Gong Ji-young, and she's one of Korea's most successful writers. She's definitely up there anyway. And she's one of the key writers of the 386 generation. And the 386 generation refers to people in Korea born in the 1960s who were politically active in the democracy movement in the 1980s, and then were shaping Korea's politics and direction of the country when they were in their 30s in the 1990s. And so, therefore, this is the 386 generation. And Gong is also seen as one of the trailblazing and certainly one of the leading female writers of her generation, of that 386 generation, along with people like Shin Kyung-suk and various other writers. She made her debut in 1988 and has published several best-selling novels, many of which have been adapted into films, including Go Alone Like a Rhino Horn, which hasn't been translated into English yet, I don't think. Our Happy Time, which has been translated into English, and then most recently, Dogani, which is also available in English now and has a successful film adaptation. But the story we're looking at today is seen as one of her key short stories. So why is that? What is it about this story that makes it such an important work? Sorry. So, Human Decency is one of Gong's most famous short stories. So, it was initially published in 1993, and the English translation is by Bruce and Juchan Fulton, the acclaimed and prolific translators of many books and short stories. In the history of across the history of translated Korean literature. And the English translation was first published in 1997 in the Wayfarer collection. That's a famous collection of Korean short stories translated into English. I don't have a copy of that collection. I'd quite like to get my hands on one, but I don't have that collection. But then Human Decency was published again in 2006 in the Jimundang collection. That's this volume here. And then again, it was published a few years later in the Modern Korean Literature collection. So it's been the English translation has been published at least 3 times. And I think the reason it keeps getting republished is that it finds Gong reckoning with Korea's turbulent modern history, with the democratic movement of the 1980s, and with the relative prosperity of the 1990s, and trying to come to terms with the role her generation played in these pivotal historical events. So, what is the story that Gong is telling in Human Decency to reflect on the role of the 386 generation in modern Korean history? So, it's the early 90s. The protagonist is, a youngish woman who works as a journalist and feature writer for a women's magazine. As the story begins, she is working on 2 assignments. The first assignment is an interview with a former labor activist and protester called Kwon Og-yu. Kwon was imprisoned for 20 years at the age of 28 and has recently been released and has published a book that has not sold particularly well. The interview is a chance for him to promote his story, his book, and his charity work. And his story is desperately sad. Many of those arrested alongside Kwon were just outright executed, or they suffered awful torture in prison. And many of them simply passed away in prison. They just died through ill treatment and so on. And the journalist is moved by her interview with Kwon, but she's also struck by the futility of his position. And this causes her to reflect on those people that she herself has lost. So the Hubei who was killed by a tear gas canister, the friend taken away and tortured who later committed suicide, the other friend killed by a riot policeman's metal baton. And she wonders at the worth of her job now. Has she abandoned her principles? Was her activist youth worth the pain and loss that she has experienced and that these people close to her have experienced? And these questions are then further highlighted by the second person she is sent to interview. So, who is this second interviewee, and how does this person represent a different aspect of Korea in the early 1990s? So, the journalist's other assignment is to interview Lee Min-ja. Lee Min-ja is a kind of lifestyle and meditation guru. I think we'd call them a mindfulness guru or something like that these days. And she has recently returned to Korea from a spiritual sojourn to India, Africa, and various other places. And the journalist's editor has recently become obsessed with E's teachings. And E's book is a bestseller. And as such, the article on the labor activist, Kwon, is put on the back burner in favor of the best-selling meditation expert E. And when the journalist interviews E, she is, as you would expect, sharply different from Kwon, the labor activist. E radiates contentment, inner peace, and tranquility. The journalist is drawn to E and feels inspired by her, but then she also feels some resentment. E left Korea during the 80s to travel the world and find inner peace. And in contrast, our journalist suffered through the 80s as an activist. And ultimately, she realizes perhaps that people don't care. She asks, hadn't I escaped the 1980s, that decade to which I had consigned my 20s? The dead were dead, and those who had been released from jail were free. The readers of our magazine didn't care for that sort of story anymore. It was a hit song whose time had passed. And what did this mean for me? What does it mean for her indeed? What is Gong saying about her generation and Korean society after the 80s? So there's a lot of thorny and complicated questions in this story. One of the main questions addressed is the idea of, can we ever escape the 1980s? The journalist realizes that now, in the 90s of the story, people laugh at the thought of the movement of political activism. Society has seemingly moved on. Perhaps if you're following the news, hasn't moved on after all. But what it has moved on to might not have been worth fighting for. She calls the 90s the decade of great ambition. But then she rants about the discrimination that women face in the home, the workplace, and in cultural life in general. She rages against the commercialization and consumerism that she sees in the 90s. What would our journalists be thinking about the 2020s? She says, we speak not of what is right and wrong, but of what we like and dislike. Near the end of the story, she recognizes that at least now, at least, it is possible for Lee Min-ja to be different. She can teach people meditation. She can tell lonely people that they are valuable, and that is certainly worth something. But there's also this clear condemnation of the direction that Korea took in the 90s, and the idea that these so-called lifestyle gurus although perhaps helpful, are just helping you cope with a fundamentally flawed situation, and that perhaps the activists of the 80s failed and lost their ideals and dreams. Anyway, Gong Ji-young's Human Decency raises some profound questions about activism, disillusionment, and the shifting values of Korean society. What do you think? Can a generation truly move on from its past? Have you ever felt conflicted between your ideals and the realities of life? I'd love to continue the discussion in the comments below, so please share your thoughts if you have any. And thanks for watching, as always. And take care, and I'll see you in the next video.